Hey, it's Jack, and this video is called Will He Make a Good Husband? If you haven't subscribed to my channel, I would love for you to do that. You can just click the button here and then tap the bell notification because that will let you know as soon as new videos come out. So let's get into it. Will he make a good husband? This is my 5-point checklist. This is not designed to be an exhaustive checklist, but it is a necessary checklist, which means that if any of these things don't check out with him, you might want to ask yourself some serious questions about whether he's a good guy for you to invest in longer term. So let's get to it. Number one, is he trustworthy? Is he trustworthy? Now, what I mean by this is really, do his actions match his words? Does he do what he says he's going to do? Is he able to show up for you in that way that when he says, yep, I'm going to do that, that he's going to do that? Now, I don't mean with this some impossible standard, right? This is not like 100% every single time. This is more of a, it's more of an 80-20 kind of thing. It's more of a, does he most of the time do what he says he's going to do? Does he most of the time, when he says he's going to show up, does he show up? When he says we're going to make that happen, does he at some point make it happen? If he says, I'm going to see you for a date at 6 o'clock tomorrow, is that what happens? Or if it's not going to happen, does he actually take the time to let you know and renegotiate with you something else? So it's kind of like another way of saying this would be, does he have integrity? And I encourage you to look for his actions as much as you do for his words. There's lots of guys, not just guys, but lots of guys who are talkers. They talk a great game. In the game that they talk, they are, incredibly successful, amazing people who do great things for people. Look at the reality of their lives. Look at the reality of how other men who are, respectable and trustworthy orient to them. Do other men respect them? Do other men trust them? Do they have a reputation as people who show up, and can be counted on? Because if you're going to build a long-term relationship with a guy and make him your husband, you want to be able to count on him, you want to be able to depend on him, you want to be able to trust him, because that's also going to be what allows you to relax into the relationship, to feel held, to feel loved, to feel supported. And I think they're important things. You deserve them in a relationship. All right, number two. Is he consistent? The more I've been thinking about this and getting reflection from other videos and comments and the sorts of problems that people have with men that show up and then disappear, men that kind of are hot and then are cold, the more I just get that for a long-term committed marriage, that there's something to be said about consistency. And if he's not consistent in the beginning, when it's often the easiest to be consistent, right? Because there's the chase, there's the pursuit, there's the newness, there's the fantasy of what could this become, there's the heat, there's the falling in love, there's the intoxication, there's all the sorts of things that can happen in the early stages of getting to know someone. If he's not consistent then, what has you think that he might be consistent, 1, 2, 5, 10 years from now, when there's all sorts of things that have his attention and your mutual attention in the relationship? So by consistency, I mean things such as, is he consistently initiating with you? Is he consistently in contact with you? Is he consistent in his level of care towards you? Is he consistent in that his actions match his words? Does he just kind of show up and orient to the relationship? And of course, there's some subjectivity in this, right? In your experience of what you need to experience in order to feel some consistency. And I want to say, let's not get too complex here. There's also some kind of general objective standard of, does he show up for it? It's like if someone has a job, do they show up for it? Do they go every day, right? If he's in a relationship with you, does he show up every day, right? There would need to be some good reason why he's not in contact with you for a day. Right? There need to be some good reason that ideally he'd be communicating to you in advance. Does he care and protect you? Right? Does he care about deepening a relationship with you? Does he want to, progress and forward things and move them on and build something with you? And, there's either a sort of, again, I'm not dumb. I'm a smart guy. I can handle lots of complexity. And there's so much that I've gained in my own life from sometimes being able to say, look, let's just cut the complexity and get to the simplicity of this. Most things in life are either growing or dying, right? To some extent, they're either kind of being built up or they're kind of in decline. What is happening in terms of his orientation to you in relationship? Is there some sense that he's continuing to attend and build with some kind of consistency? He's going to have down times. He's going to have man cave times. He's going to want to withdraw from you at times and man cave up and get his center and his space. And that's all part of being a guy for most of us. And that doesn't mean that at some point before too long, we're back and we're back engaging and back in connection, and that there's some kind of consistency to that you can rely on. I don't mean that he's attending to you every moment of the day. I mean that there's a consistency that if you say, hey, there's something I need you to look at, it doesn't take him 3 months to get back to you, right? That it shows up in his world. Just the same thing as if you were in a job and we said to you, like, is your manager consistent? Right? Do they attend to you? Do they show up? Do they care about you? Do they listen to your feedback? If there's a problem, do they help you deal with it? All those kinds of things can apply the same in relationship. Okay, in at number 3, this is building off the work of John Gottman, who's widely considered the foremost marriage researcher in the world. Can he be influenced by you? Will he receive your influence? Now, I want to make an important distinction here. Receiving influence means that he's willing to listen to you, and in some situations he's willing to accommodate to you or include your own desires or shift a plan or renegotiate an agreement with you. So there's some way that he can receive your influence, and I don't want that to be confused from he does what you want him to do. Right? Because most of you, if you want a guy that's in his masculine essence, you actually don't want him to tell you something just because you want to hear it, and you actually don't want him to do something just because you want him to do it. What you want is a guy that can be in his power and discrimination and make good decisions. And sometimes he has to do things because that's really in his heart. That's what he thinks is the right thing to do, and you may or may not agree with him. And you want someone that's willing to be influenced by you and listen to you, and when he's genuinely influenced by you, like you bring an idea and he's like, that's a great idea, or you point out a shortcoming with something he's doing, or there's a factor that he hadn't considered that you want him to consider, or you let him know, hey, there's this thing that I really think you need to put some attention on, that he has some curiosity about that. Now, the way you bring that influence is important. So I'm not talking about can you influence him when you guys are in the depths of an argument. I'm not talking about when you guys are in rupture and disrepair, can you influence him? Because probably there are other things that are going on in those situations. Probably there's your defenses, your wounds, other things mutually that are activated. But I mean, when you guys are in somewhat of repair and somewhat connected, can you influence him? Can he hear you? Can he actually listen to you? Can he take on your view? Can he take on your perspective? Because that kind of mutual influence, Gottman says, is the number one predictor of marital success. So if Gottman's saying that's the number one thing, and you're saying, wow, that's completely absent in my relationship, ding, 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 that's a red flag. Because that kind of, I call it like a pro-social behavior, like an ability to orient to other and receive them and take them on and show up for the mutual values that you have, show up for the mutual plans and things that you're both invested in creating in your lives. That pro-social behavior is hard to learn, right? If it's not there now and this guy's been a human being for 20, 30, 40, 50 or more years, it's probably not that he's just going to suddenly turn that on in the course of the relationship. So I would be asking difficult questions to yourself if that's there. Gottman talks about bidding. And bidding, if you've not come across it, bidding is a turning into the other person. So if the other person says, oh, wow, the weather's just changed, you don't ignore them, that you do your best to receive it and say, oh, has it? Or I wasn't predicting that. Or does that change our plans? And he can look at just bidding alone and make a pretty good prediction about whether the relationship's going. Now, it doesn't mean that every single thing, every single time your partner says that you have to turn to. There's obviously going to be times when you're going to need space from one another, when you're going to need to be on your own time, on your own schedule, on your own rhythm. But when you are spending time together, is there a sense that we can orient and receive one another? There's a sense that if you say something or think something or feel something, that there's at least a minimum effective dose of consideration that he can have for you. All right, in at number 4, can you guys work things out? Can you guys sit down and work things out? When you have a disagreement, when you have different things that you want to do, differing desires for a trip or for a weekend, can you come together? And again, this is not an always standard, right? There's always probably going to be some things that are going to be ongoing work for you. If it's a real relationship, there might be some deep things that it's bringing up in both of you around attachment or trust or control or different ways that you experience your childhoods, and you're now bringing that into the relationship. So it's not like, can we solve everything that we've got to work on, boom, like that, but is there a general ability to keep coming back together? Is there a stickability? Is there a we're going to see this out, we're going to work this together, we're going to work it together even when we can't work out how to work it together, that there's some impetus, right? If he's a guy that's just going to check out and not want to look at things, not want to deal with things, see it as too much, that can be a difficult trait for you to work with in a longer term relationship, right? Because they're inevitably going to be, each of our stuff is going to come up. And even the stuff that's unique to our connection that we may not have experienced in other connections, that's going to come up here as well. So there's a kind of graft, elbow grease, stick-at-itness, mutual, coming back to the table. I remember even one of my very first mentors just saying this just simplistically, he's like, if you can't do that enough, it's really hard to make it work. And I still think that's really sound advice. That doesn't mean you have to, I'm distinguishing the desire to come back to the table. It doesn't mean you always have to be able to resolve things, right? It's more that desire and that willingness than it is the actual skill and capacity. I think that skill and capacity can be developed both in the relationship and with the right professional support if needed. It's the willingness, is there a willingness to work? Is there a willingness to see the relationship as important enough that I'm going to invest in it? I'm not just going to relegate it always in my priorities. And then the fifth thing, which is probably as important, if not more important than any of these, do you guys have real compatibility? Do you guys have real compatibility for a long-term partnership? So I'm not talking about high school love, right? I'm not talking about I'm going to feel good all the time. I'm not talking about, am I gushing in my heart? I'm talking about mature adult love. I see you in your light and darkness. I see me in my light and darkness. We both have our defenses and wounds. Are we going to have a way of working with them? Because if you're with someone that has a very different defensive style than you, it can sometimes be difficult because you just kind of don't get it. That's not to say you couldn't work through that, but again, there's going to have to be a mutual orientation and willingness to do that. Do we have similar worldviews? Do we have similar deep values? Do we have a similar lifestyle we want to cultivate? Do we have a similar relationship to our careers and what we think is important? Whether you might have 100% career and he's 100% at home, or vice versa, or anything in between. Can we come to some kind of shared understanding of that? Do we want to have children? What is the value of family? If you're too far apart on any one of these, just know that might be a challenge, and it might be better to be in that as a real conversation with one another. Like, hey, there's this thing, we're kind of different, not making you wrong, not making me wrong. What are we going to do about that? How can we work it? Much better to be in that conversation than find out later, like, oh yeah, actually we don't have compatibility. We had chemistry, right? So I'm really distinguishing compatibility from chemistry here. Chemistry is mostly a sexual animalistic thing that you can have with a lot of people, probably. Compatibility, real compatibility, exists with many fewer people. And real compatibility is, and as I see it, the difference between a relationship that can continue to grow and thrive even whilst it may have its challenges and edges, versus a relationship that kind of gets to a certain point and it's kind of had its day. And if that day, its peak day, is in the past, you've got a problem. That's not the relationship that you want to invest in as a marriage. And I know that from personal experience of making, I think, a wrong decision. All decisions lead in the right path. But when I got married in my 20s, that wasn't a good decision from that perspective. It wasn't a good decision from, are our best days ahead of us? It was more of a high school thing of, I'm trying to get back to something, and I don't want you to have that experience. I want you to learn from my own difficult experience in that territory. So if you've liked this video, I want to invite you to watch another video, which is if he's ready for a relationship, and I'm going to put a link to that video up here so that you can see it. That video will complement what you've seen in this video. And I also want to make an invitation to you, which is, if you haven't taken my free webinar, come and take it. Click the link below this video. It's called The 3 Keys to Being Relationship Ready, and you can find a time that works for you in your time zone. It's got great feedback. It's pretty great material. I know that from all the feedback I've gotten for a long time. It's with my teaching partner, Clayton Olson, and we'd love for you to come and spend an hour with us. So click that link, find a time that works for you. We will see you there. And as always, I'm Jack. Thanks for being here.